Hey, podcast listeners. Tired of ads barging into your favorite news podcasts? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. Stay up to date on everything newsworthy by downloading the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free news. That's amazon.com/ad-free news to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Welcome to the 5 o'clock show. It's time for Common Sense. Now, it's Katz and Cosby with John Katzimatidis and Rita Cosby, standing for truth, justice, and the American way, bringing common sense to the world. Now, here's John Katzimatidis and Rita Cosby.
Tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies. Tell me lies.
And we are starting, John, with Tell Me Lies, because there's a lot of hypocrisy going around. We're going to talk about that today on Katz and Cosby.
Now in the studio, we have Judge Weinberg. We have a special guest, Steve Moore.
More money.
And more money. And Craig Eaton. Welcome, guys.
Welcome. Thank you.
Now, are there so many lies going around, Rita?
There are a lot of lies. And Craig Eaton, we were talking about this. The fact that now the Democrats are saying, we're not sure if the election is going to be legitimate, if it's going to be certified. But Trump, they say, is the threat to democracy.
Well, the hypocrisy is that the Democratic members of Congress in 2020, the same people who were cursing Donald Trump for what they say he did, are the ones now that are saying they may not concede the election when Trump wins. Yeah,
Jamie Raskin.
Yeah.
Jamie Raskin, who of all things, and let's remind everybody who he is, the congressman, of course, from Maryland, but he's also on the so-called January 6th committee, where they were going after Trump. And yet now he again, for another election cycle, is saying, well, we're not sure if it's going to be done properly, but that's okay for them to say it. But God forbid President Trump even suggests that.
Well, by the way, has Stacey Abrams ever conceded that she lost the governorship twice?
No, she hasn't.
Not even the one 4 years ago.
Not at all. And Hillary Clinton has questioned it, too.
These are the same
Steve
people
Moore.
who voted. Hold on. These are the same people who voted in Congress against a voter ID system. They voted against it. So, by the way, 75% of Americans are in favor of that. 76% of black Americans are in favor of it. 72% of Hispanic Americans are for it. How is this racist?
Wait a second. Governor Newsom in California, we signed an executive order yesterday.
Yes.
Banning requests for
Voter ID.
Voter ID.
Oh, my God.
I mean, how could you? And DOJ, we're going to talk with Dershowitz in a little bit, Professor Alan Dershowitz. Department of Justice, Biden's DOJ is suing Virginia because he removed about 6,000 names that were non-citizens. Right. So he's got to fight that. Can you believe that? I mean, that is amazing at this time. And yet, they say Trump is, by the way, Steve, you and I were talking also the Chicago Economic Club today.
Talk about it. Tell me what happened in the Chicago Economic Club today. Donald Trump was speaking.
I thought he was excellent. He was was on for about an hour and a half. It was John Micklethwait who was hostile. When you say he was hostile,
I would say he was downright rude. I honestly would. I couldn't believe it.
But Trump handled himself beautifully. And he was calm, he was cool, collected. And the thing I told John earlier today, because I thought of you when he said this, Trump said in the middle of the whole interview, he said, I am a common sense conservative. Rita, who have you heard that from?
A very charming man who sits
John,
next to me over here.
You should have coined that phrase because it was almost plagiarism. And Trump was right. He came across
plagiarism?
Speaking of which, we'll get to that in a minute, Judge.
And it was really fantastic. He talked about his plan. It was a pro-worker, pro-America plan. But I loved his demeanor. And when he's talking about the economy, that's his home turf.
You know what? Let's talk about turf. I found it really outrageous. I get so angry. Here he is coming before the Economic Club. He did speak before the New York Economic Club. John was there, and you guys were there. And I thought,
terrific job.
Terrific job. That was a great speech. I watched it. I thought it was fabulous. I watched this today. It was like a skewering of President Trump. I thought he was so disrespectful. He would not let him speak. And Forgive me. What does January 6th have to do with the Chicago Economic Club?
Right.
He asked him about the January 6th. What are you going to do with
Rita,
if the election is an
I
X?
agree with you. He was hostile and he was rude. But what impressed me, Trump did not lose his cool. He looked, very presidential, and he just swatted him away rhetorically.
Shame on him. What is January 6th all over again? Yeah. Where we heard so many times about the problems with Nancy Pelosi not allowing she didn't even know about it for the national security or
the National Guard to come in. Right. Right. And the president's like, what does this have to do with all of this?
Are we ever going to find out the truth about January 6th?
No, I doubt it. But here's the thing, that Trump was quite effective at bringing the conversation always back to the economy, working class Americans, how he was going to create jobs. And I thought it was a virtuoso performance. I really did. And I think, by the way, the audience, that's a Chicago audience.
The audience stood up and applauded.
Yeah. Chicago's a pretty democratic town, John, as you know. And the audience was applauding almost everything that Trump said.
Yeah, it was almost like, by the way, it almost looked like a boxing match because the guy wouldn't let him get a word in. Then they were like cheering for their guy.
I think the people in Chicago have reached the, whatever you want to call it, the FU level.
Yeah, the boiling point.
Because it's going to become worse than San Francisco.
It is. And one of the things, by the way,
and New York is headed that direction too.
And John, speaking of which, migrant, they talked about the cost of the migrant crisis, the border crisis, and new numbers coming out about how much it's going to cost New Yorkers. Every single New York voter, they say $200. And border agents are now saying, you guys, that they are planning on leaving in droves if Kamala Harris gets in. That they are so fed up, they feel so disrespected.
You forget, Kamala Harris wants them to leave in droves.
Yeah, how sad is that, John?
Think about that. That's because, now I'll give you the reciprocal of that. Donald Trump says he's going to give them a 10% raise because they haven't gotten a raise in, 5 years? So he's trying to fix that. Yeah. Where Kamala Harris is praying they leave so there's no controls at all.
Yeah, how sad. You're absolutely right. By the way, we're going to be talking to the president of the Border Patrol Union later on in the show.
Yeah, because ask him that question.
Yeah, I can't wait to ask him that. And also, they have endorsed Trump, understandably. My goodness, understandably. Well, joining us now, you guys, we have Professor Alan Dershowitz. And Professor Dershowitz, we're so thrilled to have you here on Katz and Cosby. Let's first start with this lawsuit that the Department of Justice is suing Virginia, saying that, they shouldn't have removed non-citizens, illegal voters from the voter rolls. Youngkin just is shaking his head. He can't believe it.
No, you can believe anything when it comes to what the hard left will do in weaponizing the law to achieve their results. I need to call you back. I'm sorry. Something just came up. Sorry.
Oh, we got something. Maybe it's President. Maybe it's Netanyahu or something. Who knows? Yeah.
But his point was interesting because he's right. The hard left will do anything they have to do to win. At all costs, they need to win.
Like trying to get him off the ballot? We're trying to preclude him unconstitutionally from being on the ballot?
And then prosecute him and try to kill him.
And sue him civilly and try to bankrupt him.
So I'm the non-lawyer here at this table, but I'm looking at this, and there's 6,000 people who were illegally who illegally received a ballot. And the governor quite correctly said for election integrity, we cannot allow these people to vote. And the federal government is suing Virginia?
They're suing them.
It's absurd.
Saying it's not in the 90-day window. That's what they claim. And they're like, excuse me, these people are not supposed to be on here to begin with. And you would think how important that is.
The Constitution of the United States does not provide for a 90-day window.
Right, exactly.
And you guys,
I didn't find it in there.
And you guys, while we're waiting to hear back from Professor Dershowitz, we now have the great Bill O'Reilly. Bill, we were just talking about the fact that DOJ is suing Virginia, over this issue of kicking off non-citizens. You probably saw this, a number of these governors have removed these non-citizens who you shouldn't have on the voter rolls, and Department of Justice is suing them. You can't make it up, Bill.
Yeah, I know they'll lose the Department of Justice, and hopefully the suit won't even be filed. So Kamala will lose in 3 weeks from today, and it'll all be put down. But all of these things are just signal after signal after signal. And, it's interesting because I have a lot of liberal friends. I mentioned this before on the Cass and Cosby show. And when I ask them, I don't use emotion. I mean, I'm not in it to scorn anybody. We're all Americans. We all have a right to vote who we want to vote. But when you ask the essential questions of, okay, what good does that do? All right, what good does the Department of Justice using its resources, which of course it should be using to chase Puff Daddy all over the place, what good does it do to sue a state that's trying to clean up its voting rolls? And then you get a look, you get a stare. And these are educated people. They can't answer the questions. And so you go on and on and on and on and on with that kind of a situation.
Yeah, no doubt. By the way, speaking of which, Bill, too, speaking of on and on, Kamala Harris is starting to do a bit of a media blitz this week. What do you make of the fact she's doing a Charlemagne the God because she's trying to woo African-American male voters? Her campaign's pretty much said that out there. And then also tomorrow, Bret Baier on Fox News. That's interesting.
Well, Bret Baier's not going to help her with African Americans. The God guy might. There is African American media. The blacks consume the media, and he's a pretty big name in it. So that makes sense to me that she would go in there and say, "Look, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z for blacks," and okay. Now with the Baier thing. This is fascinating to me because tonight at 9 on Common Sense, right before Rita Cosby, everyone, the exact same thing happened to me in 2008. Exactly the same. So then Senator Barack Obama is slipping in the polls, September, running against John McCain. I get a call out of nowhere, and I was on Fox News Time, and I was saying, "Hey, Senator, come on." He told me you were going to come on my show, which he did in New Hampshire in the primary. And this is the time to do it. I get a call. Be in York, Pennsylvania tomorrow at 10 a.m. and you can interview Obama. And it came out of nowhere. And he had not done any interviews on Fox. So I did, of course, right? And I'm going to play 2 minutes of that interview tonight. On WABC. And the reason I'm doing it is to show you the difference between what an aggressive interviewer does. And we weren't, it wasn't nasty. It wasn't confrontational. Weren't bad feelings. And I forced them to answer the question. And it's a question that's still relevant today about Iran nukes. When I say I'm forced them, you'll see. I saw he had to answer it, and that's what Baier's got to do tomorrow. So when I say got to, this interview is harder for Baier than it is for Harris.
Is she desperate to go to Baier?
I don't know. I don't know if it's desperate or not. I don't know if that word. I was at Yankee Stadium last night for the opener. And John McLaughlin, the pollster, was there along with very powerful New York City people, all of whom wanted to know, is Mayor Adams going to survive? And I told them no, he will not. Just that's an aside. But desperate, I don't know if it's the right word. They know that they are sinking, not dramatically, but it's worrisome. And they feel that they might be able to get through a 20-minute, and that's all it is. They put a cap on it. I interviewed Obama for 45. They might get through it with Baier, because Baier is not an opinion host and he's not confrontational. But Baier himself, if he doesn't come across as really holding her accountable if she dodges, is going to put his career at great risk. So there's a little high drama tomorrow.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point because people will be watching him.
Can I ask you, Bill, if you were doing that interview because Brett actually sent out a tweet today saying, what question should I ask Kamala Harris? What do you think, what question do you think would be the most important thing to ask? If you're doing the interview, what do you ask her?
Well, number one, it's not a good sign if they're sending out tweets wanting to know what question. Right. Now, to be fair, he did that to gin up interest in the interview. That's a marketing tool.
Right.
Okay. So if I'm interviewing, you got to understand what this is. It's a prize fight. All heavyweight interviews are prize fights. You got to know who your opponent is, and you have to have a strategy.
Right.
Because nobody's going to do anybody any favors in there. Now, the first thing I open up with is something that she has said, that she can't deny saying. And that, of course, would be, you said on The View there isn't one thing you could think of that you would change under President Biden. Now, that immediately puts you in charge of the fight. You just by asking the question, she's backpedaling now. And then I would say, did you really mean that? Okay. Then it's over to you, Madam Vice President, which is how I would address her. What is she going to say? I assume she'll say, well, there are, of course, things, blah, blah, blah. And then I would pounce, the O'Reilly pounce that I'm famous for. I would say, and you have to have a stat ready. It has to be ready to go. It is estimated that the open door policy that you and Joe Biden had has cost the United States $3 trillion or whatever the stat is. And you got to cite who gave it to you. How do you justify that? I would lead with that. And then I would go into...
I wish you were doing the interview.
Of course, everyone does. Everyone does. And then you get into, you spend the first 10 minutes on immigration. First 10 minutes. Because inflation is a little trickier.
Oh, you're going to let the criminals and murderers in.
Right. And then you get into, the specifics of the horror of, okay, not only are we spending money we don't have because we have a $35 trillion debt, $9 trillion of which came in the last 3 years under you guys, okay, but what do you say to Lake and Riley's family? Right. There she's going to pivot into it's Trump's fault. And that's where the interview starts to get dicey because she's looking for again, prize fight analogy, an opening to drag Trump in that he's the problem because they didn't pass this Chuck Schumer bill. So you don't want to get bogged down in that until the end. And then I would pivot immediately. Essentials of life were up 20%. Under Trump, when he walked out the door, it was 1.4% inflation. Can you explain that? Again, stat.
Yeah, you know, by the way, Bill, did you see this? And I'm curious, Steve, more on this. You know, it's interesting. The other day, Obama actually came out and said, yeah, Trump had a great inflation. I gave it to him. Right. You know, I know.
That's fine. That's great. Yeah. He gave it to him. I'm sure Trump is very grateful and gave him a nice Christmas gift. Yeah. All right. So
and Trump gave Biden a low inflation rate, and Biden blew it up.
You have to be laser locked in on your opponent. You can't let it deviate out. Now, Kamala Harris has never, in all of this time that she's been running, or the 3 years she's a vice president, and you would feel that you can't be a vice president, and I'm the expert on this after writing Confronting the Presidents. You can't be a vice president and undermine the main guy, because they've all been 45 guys. It's impossible. So when J.D. Vance was going, Harris did this, Harris didn't do anything. Harris did what she was told. Go to this funeral, go down the border and wave at people in El Paso. That's what she did. She didn't make policy. But it shows because she doesn't have solutions to the problems. And then after you get by immigration and you get into inflation, then the next thing Bear should do, and I hope he's listening, is go into problem solving. How specifically, Madam Vice President, would you solve the Ukraine thing? Or is it every 6 months we have to go and give them $10 billion or whatever it may be? How would you do it specifically? You think she can stand up and answer those questions? I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I agree. By the way, Bill, you hit it on the head with specifics, because that's the one thing she hasn't really been. She's come up with this circular answer. The other day she did one with Roland Martin. You probably saw it. She was asked about crime, and she gave this thing about the constellation in the skies, and it's
ran it tonight.
Right.
I wrote it on Common Sense.
Yeah, isn't that it's an astounding, and it does have to be laser like, and also her track record, reading back the quotes of what she has said. I mean, she has said some very, highly,
She wanted to abolish ICE.
Well, abolish ICE, also open up and make anybody who crosses illegally legal.
Legalize.
Right. What did you mean? Here's exactly what you said. Here's what you said on this date, on this time. What do you know? I mean, a lot of that. And you're right. She hasn't been held to her feet to the fire at all.
Now, FNC can have tape loaded and ready to go. But I don't know if they've agreed to that or not. Look, you can get her on almost every issue because she's on the wrong side of almost every issue. You can get her on now. You want to legalize pot federally? What is that? What good does that do? Have you walked down the street of Manhattan lately? Have you seen the little kids getting stoned before they go to school lately? Have you seen any of that? Now you want it nationwide? Only 3 countries, non-communist countries, have abortion on demand for any reason at any time. Why do you think there's only 3 countries in the world that allow that? How about that for an abortion question?
Yep. No, that's great. That's great. Bill, anyway, I wish you were.
Everybody wishes I were doing the interview, but she would never in a million years go up against me, ever.
Well, we will definitely be watching tomorrow to see what happens with Brett too, for sure. What do you make of also, Bill, just real quick, with some of the polls too, because it does seem like the polls are absolutely tightening for her and doing better for Trump.
According to McLaughlin, Trump's up by 2. And at this time in 2020, he was down by 10. Trump was. So that's a pretty big swing. And Trump, of course, lost by 4.5 points in 20. So the polls were up by 6. Now, if the same system is in place, which I believe it is, as far as polling is concerned, that's what the Democrats are worried about. That all the polls had Hillary in 16 and Biden in 20 much further ahead of Trump than what it turned out to be. If that's the case, and I think it might be the case, because I have said this isn't a prediction, it's an opinion. I'll make a prediction on Halloween. I have said I think Trump is going to win.
Well, we pray for that.
Yeah, America prays for that.
The free world prays for that.
John, I'm telling you, nobody in Hollywood or in the Manhattan City Council is praying for that.
That's true.
We is an asterisk on the we.
Bill, thank you very much. We'll be tuning in tonight. We love having you on, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Let's take a break right now.
Yep, and we're going to get the latest on some big economic news, why the economy is a huge issue. We're talking with Steve Moore and others after the break.
A common sense recap of the day's biggest stories. It's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby. Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
And we are back here on Katz and Cosby. Well, joining us now here in studio, we have Steve Moore, the host of More Money and also the author of the Trump Economic Miracle. Steve, what do you make of, we were just talking, there are these economists out there that say that Trump's economy, his plan is not as good as Kamala's.
It should be inflationary.
Right.
Is that ridiculous or what?
And it reminds us of the 51 Intel officers who said it's Russian disinformation, the Hunter Biden laptop. Is it the same group?
So this story got a lot of attention, and in fact, in the Chicago Economics Club, you
mean the January 6th Club?
Yeah, right, exactly. So anyway, here's what the report said in the Wall Street Journal. They interviewed 50 economists from Wall Street, and they said Kamala Harris's agenda would be better for inflation and better for the debt than Trump's. And, we were laughing about this off air because, of course, Donald Trump was president. He was the president for 4 years. And the average inflation rate, do you know what the average inflation rate, Rita, was the 4 years he was president?
Very good.
1.9%.
Yeah, exactly. I was about to say 1.9.
Which is below the Fed's target of 2%. Do you know what the Biden-Harris average annual inflation rate has been? 6.5%.
And at one point went to, 9%. Skyrocketed, right?
So we've been saying all along, Steve, he promised the poor people a better deal. He promised the middle class a better deal. And they're paying double or triple for their gasoline. Exactly. And they're paying 30-40% more for their food.
Exactly. And that's why people
Where's the better deal?
And so these economists must be suffering from severe Trump derangement syndrome to say that Trump would be worse than Kamala when they both have records. It's like saying you have two batters you can bring to bat with 2 outs in the ninth inning. One guy hit 4 home runs in a row and the other one struck out the last 3 times up. Who are you going to bring out to the plate? They want the guy who struck out, in this case, the gal. The other thing they talked about was the debt. They say the debt's going to be worse under Trump than under Kamala. Now, by the way, neither of them had very good records on that debt. Okay, neither of them. They both increased the debt. But
Trump was COVID.
No, but even when you take out COVID, the debt did go up under Trump. But it went up twice as fast, twice as much under Biden and Harris. So how can you say with a straight face that Harris would be better on the debt? And how can you say he would? And by the way, that article's gotten all this attention. All the media keeps talking about this. And by the way, you asked the question off air. Who are these economists?
Right.
We don't even know who they are.
Right. Well, and the problem, I think, Steve, is if you just look at one side, like you said, it's sort of this gaslighting. It's this group, like we were just going back to the 51 Intel. How many times was it recited? We heard it in the debate. Biden used it in the debate. Yep. People still go back to the 51 Intel, even though many of them have been discredited. Mm-hmm. How do people get the real facts from fiction other than reading your book?
Well, that's a good way to start.
Yeah.
The book is called The Trump Economic Miracle. Donald Trump came up with the title. He wrote the foreword to the book. I wrote it with the most famous economist in the world, Arthur Laffer, who should have been the one who won the Nobel Prize yesterday. He did not. But I want people to get it because, especially if you have friends or family or neighbors who are undecided, and there are a lot of undecided voters out there, Rita, those are the people who have to read the book because we just put side to side. Here's what happened under Trump. Here's what happened under Kamala Harris and Biden. You make up your mind, but these are the facts. And on almost every economic measurement, the economy, people's economic conditions were better under Trump. And by the way, the polls, the most recent polls show Americans feel they can trust Trump on the economy more than Kamala Harris.
They can trust Trump on the border.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
They can trust, especially with the fentanyl coming in from the Mexican gangs.
Mm-hmm. John, you're exactly right. So, I always say this is going to hopefully a 3-I election: immigration, inflation, and incomes. And those are the three, in my opinion, the three most important issues. And on each one of those, Trump's performance was far superior.
What's happening with all the pharmacies, Walgreens? I just saw today 1,200 are closing. I mean,
this is supposed to be this great economy. Every time you open up the newspaper,
according to the economists,
you see more. Yeah, according to the same economists who've gotten it completely wrong. So I'm very worried about this. I think this is an economy that is very fragile. I think the worst thing we could possibly do right now is put in a novice at best to handle the economy. Trump is a businessman. John, how long have you known Trump? Probably
about 45 years.
Yeah, the guy's a great businessman, just like you are.
No, he knows the score. I mean,
right. And that's why my dream ticket.
And the most important thing, the foreign leaders respect him.
Exactly.
And they won't cross him.
That's exactly right.
That's important. Security is very important.
Peace and prosperity.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. If you don't feel safe at home, and boy, with all the threats, one of the things we were also just talking earlier about all the threats against Trump. I mean, scary stuff.
Well, I said that again yesterday. I said Iran is going to lose $300 billion if Trump gets elected. And the Mexican cartels
will bankrupt them.
Are going to lose billions and billions of dollars.
And Russia, think about how much money Putin is going to lose if we drill, baby, drill.
Yeah, big stuff. Big stuff. Go ahead, Judge Weinberg.
And Steve, you have another problem, which is if the Trump tax cuts die, that's an automatic tax increase for everyone.
$2,000 per family.
Right. And
$2,000.
And as a real economist, as opposed to the 50s, Steve, you understand that when you raise taxes, that's not good for the economy. Yep. It's not good for productivity.
There's another
question.
Great point, Judge. And that's another question, Rita. I'd love to hear Brett Baer ask Kamala. How are you going to make the economy better if you're going to raise $5 trillion in taxes?
By the way, I'd love to see her get the grilling that Trump got with the Chicago Economic Club today. She wouldn't last 5 seconds.
Right.
I'm telling you, to his credit, because he does understand it, as you guys understand all too well. He was at least able to go back and forth with the very inside stuff, even on the economy and on January 6th. But she wouldn't have lasted 5 seconds.
By the way, even in that interview today, and you're right, it was a very adversarial interview, but Trump handled it masterfully.
Yeah, and the crowd was cheering.
And Kamala couldn't possibly pull that off.
Never. She couldn't have handled it for 5 seconds. Well, Steve, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And let's get the hot news of the day, Rita.
It's the top news of the day, sponsored by Goya. Here's Rita Cosby.
And everybody, with 3 weeks to go exactly until Election Day. Wow. Both major presidential candidates are stepping up their media appearances. Vice President Kamala Harris is taking part in today's radio town hall in Detroit with Charlemagne the God. Harris also agreed to do her first formal sit-down, as we were talking about, with Brett Baer of Fox News tomorrow. Meanwhile, Trump was in Chicago before heading out to Georgia to tape a Fox News town hall with an audience of women. That's going to air tomorrow with Harris Faulkner. And also, by the way, early voting is getting underway in 2 more states today. Voters in Georgia can now cast their ballots, while Utah will start mail-in ballots for eligible voters. 46 states and Washington, D.C. have started some form of early voting. And those are the big headlines after the break. John Levine with the New York Post on Iran infiltrating America in some very interesting ways.
You're commuting home with Katz and Cosby. Now, here's John Katzimatidis and Rita Cosby on 77 WABC.
And we are back here on Katz and Cosby. Well, Iran planning some very serious things against President Trump. There was a big report today about what they are trying to do to assassinate President Trump. Really scary stuff. Intel agencies briefing President Trump and others about it. Iran trying to infiltrate America on so many levels. And joining us now is John Levine with the New York Post. And John, you wrote a really blockbuster column. We're so happy to have you here about this foundation. It's an Iranian foundation, and they have a building right in the heart of New York City, 5th Avenue and East 52nd Street. Tell us all about it.
Right. So, it's very interesting. I received this report from George Washington University about Iranian influence, and I was reading it. And the centerpiece was this foundation called the Alavi Foundation. It was started by the Shah of Iran, and then after the Islamic Revolution, the Ayatollahs and the Islamic Republic took it over. And really, they own a 36-story building in the middle of Manhattan. They make millions and millions of dollars a year in commercial rent, and they have used that over the years to fund basically pro-Iran activity throughout the United States: schools, mosques, children's centers. In many cases, they receive taxpayer money or taxpayer subsidies, or they work with local government. In 2008, this foundation and this building was seized by the federal government on the grounds that it was in violation of U.S. sanctions on Iran, because it is literally pushing Iranian propaganda on behalf of that country. But it's been in litigation. The original ruling was overturned. And as far as I was told, the building is still technically in their hands today. And there isn't a final resolution. And they've when you look at what's happening on college campuses, this foundation also been over the years, if you can look at their tax forms, the 990s, they've pumped millions of dollars into college campuses over the years. And the level of infiltration is just shocking. No other word for it.
Wow. John, as you're talking about this, what about also the messaging too coming from them too? And you brought up the college campuses. It really hasn't been looked into, I don't think, enough, who are behind some of these protests and what kind of foreign influence, clearly, because these people all had, remember, the same signs. They all had the same tents.
They were ready to go the day after the attack on Israel. They had all their signs. They had all the uniforms were all set to go. So don't tell me this wasn't pre-planned.
The message is America is evil, Israel is evil, Jews are evil, Trump is evil. That's the message. Republicans are evil. And it's about subverting this country. It's funny, the report named all these politicians that were involved with agents of this foundation. One of the central figures I focused on was this guy whose last name is Imam Elahi. He runs this mosque in Dearborn, Michigan, which is, the Wall Street Journal famously called Dearborn the jihad capital of America. And he used to be a member of the Iranian Navy's political intelligence unit. And according to a U.S. Institute of Peace report, he came to the United States originally to supervise and inspect units of Hezbollah, a terrorist organization, in the United States. And somehow that's all okay. And he runs this mosque in Dearborn, which has a school, and he partners with all the local government out there. And you can see photos of him with John Kerry, with Kamala Harris, with Gretchen Whitmer, with, Gary Peters, the senator out there. And it's just the level of sort of mingling he has with Democratic Party elite is shocking. And I will add, many politicians were named in the report, and they were all Democrats. And I'm not making a partisan point. It's just there were no Republicans named in the report. It was exclusively Democrats that associated with this man. And I think they, big picture, view the Democratic Party as a much more suitable agent of their interests, and that, you're not, it's President Trump who's had 2, maybe 3 possible assassination attempts against him. Even though you hear it's only the violent rhetoric that, he's allegedly saying, all the violence seems to be directed toward him.
Exactly.
And it's very clear that the Iranians would much prefer him not to return to the White House because, as I believe you said on your program a moment ago, Iran was broke. It was busted. He pulled us out of the Iran deal. He was uniting the Arab world, the Sunni Arab world, against Iran. And you had things like the Abraham Accords.
John Katzmatidis, it's easier to con the Democrats. It's easier to make a deal and put blindfolders on Joe Biden, and it's easier to put blindfolders on Kamala Harris. That's why the Iranians want the Democratic ticket.
Yeah, I think from an Iranian perspective, it makes a lot of sense. Obama, Biden did the Iran deal. President Obama was committed to bringing in Iran from the cold and doing kind of a rapprochement, kind of Nixon in China, but like an Obama in Tehran. And President Biden was a part of that as the vice president at the time. The Iran deal was part of President Biden's legacy. So, he was opposed when President Trump took us out of it. He has been actively looking for ways for us to get back in bed with Iran. And obviously October 7th has sort of frozen that again. But it's a much better deal for Iran to continue to be on the Democratic ticket because they're the ones who are interested in becoming friends with Iran again and giving them money and taking off the sanctions and providing
they can get anything. Cover. Iran can get anything they want from the Democratic Party. Then they use that money. They use that money to fund the terrorist groups. I can't understand why the people that want to vote for Harris don't understand that.
Yeah, and a lot of these things, as John, you're pointing out, these organizations right under our noses. It's really frightening. John, thank you so much. Really great to have you here, John.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Really blockbuster column. Everybody take a look at it in the New York Post. And by the way, President Trump got the endorsement of the Border Patrol Union. Not a surprise, I guess, but it is a surprise because they don't usually endorse anybody. But it's pretty clear who has been supportive of the men and women that are on the front lines. And joining us now is the president of the Border Patrol Union, who represents the agents there, Paul Perez. Paul, you were there when the big announcement came down. Why was it very clear for you that President Trump was the one that you guys and your fellow men and women on the front lines that are doing the tough work are supporting?
Yes, ma'am. Glad to be here with you. So it was an obvious choice for us because myself, I've served for 27 years under 5 different administrations, and I can tell you that President Trump is the only president in our nation's history that has taken it serious enough to actually close the border down. The policies he enacted really helped us. And this administration on day one they undid everything that he did that proved to work. And so because of that, we have an untold number of illegal immigrants that have come across the country and have been committing crimes around this country and overtaking cities. So it was an obvious choice for us that we know he can do it and we know he'll do it again. So we absolutely had no qualms about endorsing Donald Trump for president again.
I mean, how bad you're down there with your men at the border. I mean, have we got a mess in our hands?
Oh, absolutely. It is worse than what people think. You know, we do a lot of congressional delegation visits, and we bring a lot of members of Congress down to the southern border. And when they see it for themselves, it's a very eye-opening experience because of the fact that you can watch it on TV, you can watch news clips, and you can hear about it and read about it. But until you see it with your own eyes, it is something else. It really, really allows them to go back onto the Hill and talk with their colleagues and explain to them how out of control this border is. So, yes, it is something to see down here.
You know, there was a news story that just came out, and everybody, we're talking to Paul Perez. He's head of the National Border Patrol Council, the big union that represents so many of these men and women. You know, there's a story that says that agents are threatening to leave in droves if Kamala Harris wins. Do you get this sense from them?
Kamala Harris is praying for it.
Yeah, it's sadly. I mean, and they said blank, I'm not going to do this blank again, that they just feel she's undermining them, to John's point, so much.
Yeah, so under because of the hiring surges, under this administration, the agents have never been as frustrated because this is the absolute definition of an open border policy. Never have we ever allowed the millions of people that are unvetted to come across. And so they did a bait and switch. And so they're talking right now about how the numbers are low for Border Patrol. But what everybody needs to understand is what they did is they made it easier for the illegal immigrants to come in because now they're flying them in. They're processing them through the ports of entry and flying them in.
I understand. Was President Bill Clinton in Georgia yesterday? What did he say?
Oh, yeah.
Front page of the New York Post today.
Yeah, he came out and said, he talked about Laken Riley, the woman who was killed in Georgia, the nursing student, and said this never would have happened if people were getting better vetted, if there was better security at the border. The next breath sounded like, you're supporting Kamala Harris. Why? But it was interesting that even everybody is coming out and saying, yeah, there needs to be better security.
But the official line, well, it's Richard Weinberg. The official line is, if only the Republicans had passed the legislation that they're pushing, which, as you know, is pure nonsense because all the rules of the game were in place. They were all rescinded on day one by the Biden-Harris administration. They didn't need a law. They had all the authority they needed. And number two, if you had passed that law, Paul, you would have ratified all the illegal conduct by the Biden-Harris administration. What say you?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. So first of all, Bill Clinton couldn't have made a better campaign ad for Donald Trump because what he said was absolutely true. And we didn't have that under President Trump. So those are the policies that we'll put back in place under President Trump. Second of all, there is a cap. There is a cap on visas that is vetted immigrants that are allowed to come across legally, legal immigration, which is something that Donald Trump supports. So if there is a cap on legal immigrants, why would we have unfettered access, no cap on the amount of illegal immigrants that can come into this country? We don't need to have a policy or legislation that allows the cartels to dictate the terms of our border security, and that's exactly what it would do. So we absolutely need Trump to come in and put his policies back into place to end this madness once and for all.
Yeah, no question. And let's not forget that just the other day, Kamala Harris said she'd like to make everybody here who's here illegal legal. I mean, she's not masquerading what her goal is.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. And let's go to a break, and we're going to come back with Miranda Devine.
Yeah, she's got info on a very big lawsuit that could show that people are sending in money for campaigns that they didn't actually do.
It's a common sense recap of the big stories. It's Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
And we are back here on Cat and Cosby. Well, joining us now is the great investigative journalist Miranda Devine, columnist at the New York Post. And you wrote this great column, Miranda, where you talked about a Democratic fundraiser, and you mentioned Act Blue playing a role stealing a GOP strategist's identity to make donations. That's what the lawsuit alleges. Talk us about that.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. This is really a scandal, and it adds to the Act Blue donations platform for the Democrats scandal that's been brewing for quite a while. We've had a congressional committee run by Republicans that's been investigating these very suspicious donations. And now we have an actual human being. He's a Republican strategist named Mark Block from Wisconsin. And he had an old email address that he never used. And he had a look at it just recently, and he found that there were something almost 385 donations made in his name, stealing his identity to Act Blue, which then funneled them through to various left-wing organizations, including a number of them, several dozen, were to Kamala Harris's, one of Kamala Harris's campaign funds. And he discovered these, and it's not a lot of money, but it's a small amount of money that's been going regularly, that he's been getting receipts for, that he hasn't paid for, that some anonymous person that in his lawsuit is called John Doe, who's based in California in Santa Monica, has been paying these little amounts to these various left-wing causes via Act Blue since between May and October. There were 400. So this is regular. They were monthly, weekly, and one-off donations. And he discovered them, and it works perfectly with this investigation that the Republicans in the House have mounted into Act Blue. They say tens of thousands of these unwitting donors like Mark Block have been also their identities been stolen to try and launder large donations through to Democrat causes, left-wing causes like Kamala Harris's campaign by splitting them up into tiny amounts to circumvent federal donations laws and the limits that are imposed on the amounts that one donor can provide.
Wow. By the way, that is a wow. Sort of these fake names or real names, but used and fake, assuming that they're obviously illegal donations, clearly. Judge Weinberg, this is stunning.
Miranda, the amazing thing about it, based on your reporting and what the House committee has done and the referrals over to the attorneys general across this is nationwide. This is not an isolated instance. This is an organized campaign for fraud, for money laundering. What say you?
Absolutely. And this is, in fact, this lawsuit that Mark Block, one of these victim donors, unwitting donors, has mounted in Wisconsin. But the House committee chairman by the name of Scheel, he has sent referrals to the attorneys general in a number of different states, also alleging that there are victims within their state, maybe 6 states in the United States, that also have had their identity stolen to fraudulently benefit the Democratic Party via these left-wing causes.
I have a question for the attorneys in the room. I mean, this is obviously clearly illegal. What are the crimes and what can be done from a legal perspective? I mean, this is outrageous.
You have money laundering, you have wire fraud, you have basic common law fraud.
I mean, but
that's small compared to the allegations that were made that there are countries kicking back, dark money.
Oh, but
I mean, hundreds of millions. I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a whole other right.
The fact of the matter is, a lot of this money allegedly is coming from foreign countries that it's being laundered through.
Yeah, do we know where the money's coming from?
Well, what about the money coming in from the CCP? I mean, and that's all cash that's getting funneled into, I know there's a lot of, I won't say who they are, but there are a lot of candidates that I know of that were getting money funneled in from the CCP. and it was getting converted from cash into bank accounts, and that's all illegal money.
Yeah, that's amazing. So Miranda, to Craig's point, where is the money? Do we know where this money is coming from? The quote John Doe money?
Yeah, there is a lot of circumstantial evidence and whistleblower evidence to say that this money is coming not just being funneled and laundered through these unwitting American donors, but it's actually originated from foreign countries like China, like Ukraine, and it's being laundered by the Democratic Party to circumvent federal election laws and the limits that are placed on contributions, and particularly on contributions from overseas, which are illegal. And so that's why this lawsuit, it seems small. I mean, it's $850 but it's almost 400 donations, 35 of them through to Kamala Harris, that have been parceled up into tiny amounts under $200, because if it's under $200, it doesn't have to be reported to the Federal Election Commission. And that's how the fraud works. They basically will take, multi-million-dollar donations or like bribes from
and they put it through
oligarchs.
A computer at $1.99 each.
Exactly. And you do that enough and you have, and that's what the beauty of this brilliant congressional investigation is, because what they did was they knew that there was a crime there through whistleblowers, but how do you actually, it's almost the perfect crime. So what they did was they got some very clever sort of analysts, and they used big data and artificial intelligence to look at FEC contribution records for the last 14 years. And they saw anomalies in there where, for instance, you had people donating money way beyond their financial ability to do so. You had elderly people making regular contributions that they would never have done. You've got just these sort of ridiculous patterns where people are obviously unwitting donors. And so the AI picked up the patterns, and then it comes down to how do you, in a court of law, verify that these patterns correlate with human beings. And Mark Block is the first of these lawsuits, but there will be many more to come. And eventually they trace back to the foreign origins of this dirty cash.
Which is why you have to have an independent congressional investigation, not controlled by the Democratic
Party. But it went
Party.
to 19 attorney generals. Is there one of them? Have we gotten any reports? Is there one of them that's working harder on it than others?
Not yet, but, there are Missouri, for instance, Andrew Bailey. I mean, there are other attorneys general. They're all sadly Republicans. I mean, this should be a bipartisan issue because both sides can circumvent the law and create a situation where you've got foreign oligarchs or the CCP controlling our elections. This should not be a partisan issue, but unfortunately,
is it possible that Kamala Harris collected $1 billion in 3 months?
Well, John, you've said it, and your mail is very good. So I think it's very possible.
Yeah, wow, that is a stunning. These are bombshells. Keep us posted. Very much.
I've been 90% correct on my allegations, mostly.
I'd say 99.99.
I know. I didn't want to be greedy.
Yeah, I'll toot your horn.
I smell something.
Yeah, there's something. I mean, first of all, this is
Miranda,
really stinks.
keep going.
Thanks, Miranda.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wow.
I mean, I'm telling you, we need justice in this world. And the problem is, if we lose the Congress, you know what happens to all those investigations?
It all gets buried.
They all get
in
buried.
the toilet.
Yeah.
It all gets buried.
And the fact it's only Republicans right now
so
looking
all our
says a
listeners
lot.
out there, pray for America. God bless America. And we stand for truth, justice
and the American way.
May we continue that way.